26 March 1942, Falmouth Harbor, Cornwall, England. The destroyer HMS Campbeltown sat low in the water at her moorings, her silhouette altered beyond recognition by the addition of false plating and a raked funnel that gave her the profile of a German MOA-class torpedo boat. And inside her bow, packed into the forward compartments where fuel tanks had been removed, sat 4¼ tons of delayed action explosive wrapped in concrete and steel, timed to detonate 12 hours after impact. Lieutenant Commander Stephen Halden Beatty stood on the bridge in the cold pre-dawn darkness, watching as Commandos from No. 2 Commando, under Lieutenant Colonel Charles Newman, filed aboard in silence, their faces blackened with burnt cork, their weapons oiled and ready. Thompson submachine guns, Bren guns, Mills bombs, fighting knives, each man carrying enough ammunition and explosive to cause havoc in the narrow streets and fortified installations of the French Atlantic port of Saint-Nazaire, where the Normandie Dock, the only dry dock on the Atlantic coast capable of servicing the German battleship Tirpitz, stood as a strategic target of the highest priority. The plan, conceived by Combined Operations Headquarters and approved by Churchill himself, was simple in concept but lethal in execution. Sail 400 miles across the Bay of Biscay, navigate the heavily defended Loire estuary under cover of darkness, rammed Campbeltown into the outer caisson gate of the Normandie Dock at maximum speed, then disembark the Commandos to destroy the dock's pumping stations, winding houses, and machinery while motor launches evacuated survivors before German reinforcements could seal the port. Beatty had studied the intelligence reports until he could navigate the approach blind. The position of coastal batteries at Point de Lève, the searchlight emplacements along both banks, the locations of flak towers mounting 20mm and 40mm guns, the narrow channel marked by buoys that wound through sandbanks and mudflats at low tide. The weather forecast was marginal: scattered clouds, moderate seas, visibility sufficient for navigation, but poor enough to obscure the flotilla from Luftwaffe reconnaissance during the daylight crossing. At 1400 hours on the 26th, the force departed Falmouth, Campbeltown, accompanied by motor gunboat 314, 16 Fairmile B motor launches carrying the assault troops and demolition teams, and motor torpedo boats 74 and 74A, tasked with firing delayed action torpedoes at the old entrance lock gates. The ships formed into columns and headed southwest, maintaining radio silence, their Oerlikon and Lewis guns manned, their crews aware that the survival rate for this operation had been calculated at less than 50%. By nightfall, they were 60 miles offshore, the sea running in long swells that sent spray across the forecastles of the motor launches, and Beatty could see Newman standing amidships on Campbeltown, checking his men, ensuring that each demolition team knew its assignment. Group 1 to destroy the northern pumping station, Group 2 to blow the southern pumping house, Group 3 to demolish the winding house and machinery that operated the caisson gates, while the protection squads established perimeter defenses and held off German counterattacks long enough for the work to be completed. The Commandos were veterans of raids in Norway and Scotland, trained in street fighting and demolition under simulated combat conditions, but nothing could fully prepare them for what awaited in Saint-Nazaire, a fortified naval base garrisoned by elements of the 280th Naval Artillery Battalion and the 22nd Naval Flak Brigade, with additional support from the 679th and 809th Infantry Regiments positioned in the town. As darkness fell completely and the stars emerged above broken cloud, Beatty ordered speed reduced to 12 knots to conserve fuel and maintain formation cohesion, and the flotilla continued south-southeast through the night, the throb of diesel engines steady and rhythmic, the phosphorescence trailing from the hulls, and the lookout scanning the horizon for U-boats or E-boats that might be patrolling the approaches. At 2200 hours, Campbeltown passed a lone British submarine, HMS Sturgeon, positioned as a navigational marker 40 miles from the estuary, and Beatty ordered the course altered to due east, directly toward the Loire. The temperature dropped as they neared the French coast, a damp cold that penetrated clothing and made metal slippery to the touch. and the officers checked their watches repeatedly, calculating time and distance, knowing that timing was everything. Arrive too early, and they would be caught in the estuary at first light. Arrive too late, and the tide would be too low to navigate the sandbanks. At midnight, they were 15 miles offshore, when lookouts spotted the loom of searchlights sweeping the sky above Saint-Nazaire, and Beatty gave the order to increase speed to 18 knots, the maximum sustainable rate for the motor launches, and the flotilla tightened formation, Campbeltown leading with MGB 314 close astern, the motor launches following in 2 columns, every man now at action stations, weapons loaded, safety catches off, the explosive charges primed and ready. And ahead in the darkness lay the estuary, the river, the fortified harbor, and the massive concrete structure of the Normandie Dock, where the fate of the Tirpitz and perhaps the entire Atlantic campaign would be decided in the next 2 hours. 28 March 1942, 0130 hours, Loire Estuary, approaching Saint-Nazaire, France. The flotilla entered the estuary in column formation, the shallow draft vessels steering carefully between the sandbanks that appeared as dark shadows in the pale starlight, and aboard Campbeltown, Lieutenant Commander Beatty conned the ship from the open bridge while the German ensign flew from the mast, a deception that had been carefully planned to buy precious minutes before the coastal batteries opened fire. The river narrowed as they proceeded inland, the black outlines of buildings and industrial structures becoming visible on both banks, and at 0120 hours, a signal station on the north shore challenged them with a flashing light, the Morse code sharp and demanding, asking for identification and purpose. Leading signalman Pike, standing beside Beatty, replied with a prepared message in German stating that they were damaged vessels seeking permission to enter harbor. And for several minutes there was silence, while the shore station consulted with higher command, and the flotilla continued upriver at reduced speed, every gun crew tensed and ready, knowing the deception could not last much longer. At 0127 hours, the searchlights erupted along both banks, a dozen beams converging on the lead ships, illuminating Campbeltown in harsh white light that turned night into day and exposed every detail of the altered destroyer and the motor launches trailing behind. And immediately the German guns opened fire, 20mm flak guns spitting streams of tracer, 40mm Bofors pumping shells at close range, 75mm and 88mm batteries on shore engaging with airburst rounds that exploded overhead in orange flashes and sent shrapnel rattling across the decks. Beatty ordered the German ensign struck and the white ensign raised, a final gesture of defiance, and he rang the engine room telegraph to full ahead, pushing Campbeltown to 20 knots as she raced toward the harbor entrance through a storm of fire that killed men at the forward guns and tore holes in the funnel and superstructure. The motor launches fared worse, their wooden hulls vulnerable to even small caliber rounds, and within minutes ML-192 was on fire, ML-262 was sinking, and ML-268 had taken casualties among her commando passengers. But the survivors pressed on, returning fire with their Oerlikons and machine guns, suppressing German positions on the quays and jetties. At 0132 hours, Campbeltown entered the harbor proper, steering for the outer caisson gate of the Normandie Dock, which was visible ahead as a massive concrete structure with a dark gap where the gate met the water. And Beatty ordered all remaining speed, the destroyer's bow lifting slightly as she accelerated to her maximum 20 knots, and the impact came at 0134 hours with a tearing crash that drove the ship 10 feet up onto the caisson, the bow crumpling but the hidden explosive charges remaining intact in their compartment. And before the ship had fully settled, Lieutenant Colonel Newman and his commandos were over the side, landing on the dock structure and racing toward their objectives through intense machine gun fire from German positions in nearby buildings. Group 1, led by Captain Bob Montgomery, fought their way to the northern pumping station 200 yards inland, using covering fire and grenades to suppress defenders, and within 15 minutes they had placed 150-pound charges on the pumps and machinery, set the time pencils for 2 hours, and withdrawn under heavy fire that killed 2 men and wounded 4 others. Group 2, under Captain Bill Pritchard, assaulted the southern pumping house, which was protected by concrete walls 3 feet thick, and they blew open the steel doors with shaped charges, fought through the interior, killing 3 German sailors who tried to defend the machinery, then placed demolition charges on all 4 massive pumps and the electrical distribution panels before falling back to the rendezvous point. Group 3 encountered the heaviest resistance at the Winding House, where German troops had established a strong point with interlocking fields of fire, and Lieutenant Stuart Chant led a frontal assault with Thompson guns blazing, while Sergeant Frank Carr worked his way around the flank and threw grenades through the windows. And in the close quarters battle that followed, the Germans were overwhelmed, and the demolition team placed charges that would destroy the machinery used to operate the caisson gates. Meanwhile, the motor launches were suffering catastrophic losses in the harbor. ML-457 exploded when an 88mm shell hit her fuel tanks. ML-177 was burning from bow to stern. ML-160 had grounded on the mudflats, and her troops were waiting ashore under fire. And only a handful of launches remained operational to evacuate the Commandos once their work was done. The Old Mole, a stone jetty extending into the harbor, became a focal point of savage fighting as German reinforcements arrived from the town garrison and attempted to prevent the Commandos from reaching the evacuation points. And Lieutenant Colonel Newman, realizing that most of his force would be unable to escape by sea, made the decision to lead a fighting withdrawal inland, attempting to break through German lines and reach the Spanish frontier 300 miles to the south. By 2:30 hours, the demolition work was complete, every primary target destroyed or sabotaged, but the cost had been severe. Of the 611 men who had sailed from Falmouth, fewer than half would return. And as the surviving motor launches turned downriver and accelerated toward the open sea, running the gauntlet of German guns that continued firing from both banks, the men aboard looked back at Saint-Nazaire, where fires burned in the dock area, and the crippled Campbeltown lay embedded in the caisson gate like a harpoon in a whale. And they knew that the hidden explosive charge was ticking toward detonation, set to destroy the gate and flood the dock at noon, 12 hours after the raid began. 28th March 1942, 1200 hours, Saint-Nazaire, occupied France. The German naval officers and technicians who had been examining the wreck of HMS Campbeltown since first light were standing on the twisted bow section and clustered around the forward compartments when the delayed action fuse completed its circuit and 4¼ tons of high explosive detonated with a blast that vaporized the bow, killed everyone within 400 yards, shattered windows throughout the port area, and sent a mushroom cloud of smoke and debris rising above the harbor that could be seen 20 miles away. The outer caisson gate of the Normandie Dock simply ceased to exist, replaced by a massive breach through which thousands of tons of seawater poured into the dock basin, flooding it to the same level as the Loire estuary and rendering it completely inoperative for the remainder of the war. The explosion killed approximately 360 German personnel, including senior officers from the Kriegsmarine and Organization Todt, who had been inspecting the captured British vessel, trying to understand how it had been so radically modified and why British commandos would sacrifice so much to ram it into the dock gate. In the town, captured commandos who had been unable to escape were being held in various buildings awaiting interrogation when the blast shook the foundations and sent German guards running in confusion, and some prisoners used the opportunity to escape, though most were recaptured within hours. The timed demolition charges placed by the assault teams had detonated on schedule earlier that morning, destroying the pumping stations, winding house machinery, and electrical systems with such thoroughness that even if the caisson gate had remained intact, the dock would have been unusable. At sea, the surviving motor launches had run the return gauntlet through the estuary, enduring continuous fire from shore batteries that sank 3 more vessels before they cleared the river mouth and headed west into open water, where they rendezvoused with destroyers HMS Atherstone and HMS Tyndale at 1400 hours. Of the 611 men who participated in Operation Chariot, 169 were killed in action, 5 died of wounds, and 215 were captured and spent the remainder of the war in prisoner-of-war camps, leaving 228 survivors who returned to England bearing accounts of extraordinary courage under impossible conditions. 5 Victoria Crosses were awarded for the action, the highest number ever given for a single operation, to Lieutenant Commander Beatty for commanding Campbeltown during the approach and ramming, to Lieutenant Colonel Newman for leading the Commandos ashore and organizing the fighting withdrawal, to able seaman William Savage, who continued firing his pom-pom gun after being mortally wounded, to Sergeant Thomas Durant, who engaged German vessels from a motor launch despite being wounded multiple times before being killed, and posthumously to Commander Robert Ryder, who commanded the naval forces and remained in the harbor directing evacuation efforts under heavy fire. The strategic consequences of the raid exceeded all expectations. The Normandie Dock remained out of commission until 1947, long after the war ended, and the German battleship Tirpitz, for whose potential use the dock had been the only Atlantic facility, never ventured beyond Norwegian waters for fear of damage that could not be repaired, effectively neutralizing her as a surface threat to Allied convoys and altering German naval strategy for the remainder of the Atlantic campaign. The wreckage of Campbeltown remained embedded in the ruined caisson until 1947, when it was finally removed during post-war reconstruction, and pieces of the ship were preserved in museums in both Britain and France as testimony to one of the most audacious combined operations of World War II. In London, Combined Operations Headquarters analyzed every aspect of the raid, documenting lessons learned about coordinated amphibious assaults, the effectiveness of explosive motorboats, the vulnerability of wooden-hulled craft to shore batteries, and the critical importance of accurate intelligence and precise timing in special operations. The French resistance in Saint-Nazaire, which had provided detailed information about dock layouts, defensive positions, and guard routines before the raid, was recognized by British intelligence as having contributed materially to the operation's success, and several members were later evacuated to England and decorated for their service. In German after-action reports, captured documents revealed genuine shock at the scale and daring of the attack, with Admiral Karl Donitz noting in his war diary that British willingness to accept such heavy casualties for a single target indicated either desperation or a level of strategic calculation that demanded respect, and security at all French Atlantic ports was dramatically increased with additional flak batteries, searchlight positions, and garrison troops that diverted resources from other fronts. The delayed action fuse mechanism used in Campbeltown became a subject of detailed study by both British and German explosive ordnance experts, and similar devices were employed in subsequent operations, including the placement of limpet mines by special forces throughout the Mediterranean theater. For the survivors, the raid remained the defining experience of their military service, and reunions were held annually in later decades, where men who had fought at the pumping stations, the Old Mole, and aboard the burning motor launches gathered to remember fallen comrades and tell stories that never fully captured the terror and confusion of those 2 hours in Saint-Nazaire harbor when 600 men challenged an entire German naval base and succeeded in destroying a target that German engineers had considered impregnable, proving that courage, careful planning, and absolute determination could accomplish objectives that conventional military wisdom deemed impossible, and establishing Operation Chariot as the model for future combined operations and as evidence that even in the darkest period of World War II, when German forces controlled the entire Atlantic coast from Norway to Spain, British Special Forces could strike deep into enemy territory and achieve strategic results that altered the naval war.